income property is the most tax-favored asset class in America, and the one that is most accessible to the most people, where the average person can just do it and do it well, is just the good old, humble, single-family home. You might not want to be investing in your own city, where you live, because if you live in a city that is a more expensive city, those markets don't make any sense. The properties that make sense for investment are inexpensive houses with good rent-to-value ratios. It all starts with just buying one property. It's not hard to do.
How do we generate enough passive income? Because wealth is measured by the amount of time you have, actually, not by as much money as you have.
Right.
If you're buying something and just hope that the market carries it, then you could be sorely disappointed. If you find something that you can breathe life into and fix and make it better, then you actually force and create your own value, and those opportunities are everywhere. I don't know any other business that you can buy something and have your tenants pay it off for you, and you get the benefits of the income.
In baseball terms, I just wanted to get a base hit. I wanted to close a deal that cash flowed, put money in my pocket. I didn't have to do a lot of work on it. Everything that I do, you could do on your own. But you might take longer and you might make some costly mistakes. You don't need to make a lot of mistakes. You learn from somebody that's been successful so that you could leverage their success. And I was living proof of that. I had no previous real estate experience, and I found a teacher, a mentor, a guide that was willing to take me under their wing, and it just paid off.
Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Hacking Real Estate. Now at Revealed Films, we've done multiple series over the years on success and finances and investment. And I have to say, I'm really excited that we created this one specifically focused in real estate. Why? Because most of the wealthiest people I know are real estate investors. And for people who created wealth not in real estate, once they have a lot of wealth, they figure out how to protect it and invest in real estate to move it forward. So this seems to be a place that we want to double click on. We want to go deeper into, not make it just a part of a financial or a success series, but actually make an entire series on it. There are so many aspects to real estate. You might invest in single-family homes. You might invest in apartments. You might put syndicates together. You might invest in so many different aspects of real estate. There's so many opportunities, and there's not one right one, but there's probably one right one for you. So the purpose here is to explore it all, to dig deep, to understand what the different ins and outs are, or the upsides and downsides of varying types of real estate investment. So with this, we brought in James Sacamano to be our interviewer, to be our guy to go out there, to scour the country, to have the conversations, to interview the people, and to find the best possible information, content, actionable data that we can go into, that we could deliver to you, and that you can leave this series with a new opportunity, a new vision, a new realm of possibilities for your future. Yes, it's true. That's what one series can do, something that can change your life, create financial freedom, create not maybe even just financial freedom, but time freedom, spiritual freedom. There's a lot of things that people discover through real estate investment. And you're going to find that people have gone from delivering pizzas or tending bar, jobs that maybe some people might consider somewhat menial or have no future in them at least, and figure out how to go from point A, which is where they are today, to point B, to success, financial freedom, and a great life. So this particular series holds a lot of promise for you. We want to deliver on a big level. It's something that we're just getting started with. Remember, this is just episode 1. So one request I have for you is that you share this. There's other people you know that I think will benefit from this content. We're in a free viewing period. It costs nothing to watch it all. So if you would, please share this. Find the people you know, take the link that you got, forward it to them, and let them also register to watch this while we are still in this free viewing period. So that's the overview. That's why you're here. That's why I am here. That's why we are here together. Let's get started. Well, I'm excited to introduce you to our first interviewee, who is Jason Hartman. James, we threw into the fire here. He went out all over the country to talk to these people, sit with them, pull the information out of them that would best serve you. And I wanted to, along the way, be able to have a conversation with James and talk a little bit about his experiences in introducing some of these interviews. So with Jason Hartman, James, what was that like?
The opportunity to interview Jason was such a delight and such a pleasure. This guy is brilliant. He's been doing it for decades. He's literally done thousands of real estate transactions in multiple states. He's got a podcast. He's a successful author, a real educator. So he was so much fun and fascinating to talk to. It was really an honor to get to do that.
Yeah, so I know that every time I've ever listened to him, I learned some really good stuff. I'm sure you pulled some great stuff out of him. So now we get to share that with you. Enjoy James's interview with Jason Hartman.
Jason, thanks so much for taking time and being with us. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
It's great to be here.
I know you're into all kinds of things, but if you can give us a little overview of what all you do.
Yeah, sure. So basically for the last 18 years, I've been helping people invest in real estate nationwide. And so we help people buy properties in prudent markets that make sense and help them build portfolios for a secure financial future.
How'd you get involved in that? What was your background?
Yeah, good question. So way back to the beginning, I guess, when I was a kid, I grew up poor, lived in Los Angeles, California, and I saw an infomercial for a real estate guru when I was 16 years old. I got his book and then started learning about it. And my first year of college, I decided I would just get my real estate license to kind of learn the basics and learn the business. And 6 months into my career, when I was 20 and a half, one of my clients, a guy named Jim, had several properties he'd purchased from me for investment, had one that he didn't like. And he said to me, why don't you list this property and sell it for me, and then I'll buy something else from you. And I said, I don't want to sell it for you as a realtor. I want to buy it from you and be an investor. So that was my first rental property at age 20. And since then, I've been buying rental properties. And my career took a turn into more the traditional real estate business, where I was helping homeowners sell their homes, and people buy homes for themselves, and a little bit of investors, but not too much. And then about 16 years ago now, Coldwell Banker approached me, and I had a traditional real estate company, and they purchased it. And so after they acquired that company, I thought, what am I going to do next? And I remembered back to the beginning of my career, my first love was investing. And I had invested along the way, made a lot of money doing that, and I wanted to help other people invest. And one of the reasons that really came to the fore at that time, back in 2005, or 2004 really, is since I was exiting that business, I knew a big check was coming when the deal was going to close. And I started looking around for places to invest that money. And I met with a whole bunch of financial advisors, people in a niche industry called exit planners, actually. And I met with them and thought, what can I do? What can I do? And I realized just one day, what am I doing talking to all these people? I'm a real estate investor. And so then the next step was I started researching markets all around the country that I thought would be good for investment. And why did I do that? I did that because I had always invested in Southern California, where I lived. And I remember going through a couple of recessions and how bumpy that was. And I thought, income property, rental property, is the most historically proven asset class in the entire world. But there's another old saying in real estate, all real estate is local. So I thought, why not take the most historically proven in asset class, income property, and diversify geographically? And I started trying to do that by myself. And I found it to be very, very, very challenging. So like so many entrepreneurs, my story is I had a problem of my own that I wanted to solve. I wanted to be a nationwide investor. And it was very hard for me to solve that problem. And I looked at how easy it was to buy stock or a mutual fund or invest in Wall Street. They make it easy. And I thought, why isn't there a company that can basically talk to people and say, look, here's a whole game plan. Here's how to build a portfolio, to retire on real estate, and to do it nationwide and diversify. And so I created this business, and I was the first customer. And then it went from there, and now we've helped thousands of clients do the same thing.
All right, so you're not married to any one type of everything's real estate.
Good question. So in the area of housing, there are a few options. Single-family homes, apartment buildings, apartment complexes, plexes, duplexes, fourplexes, that kind of stuff. And then mobile home parks, right? And that really covers the housing gamut. So my favorite, and the one that is most accessible to the most people, where the average person can just do it and do it well, and it's the most proven, is just the good old, humble, single-family home. I think that is the best asset class in America, if not the entire world, as a rental property. I think mobile home parks are probably the second best. They could be the best, but they take a lot more knowledge, a lot more capital, a lot more things can go wrong, but the upside could be very high. And then apartment buildings, also very good. I currently own a mobile home park. I've had lots and lots of single-family homes over the years, and I've had 2 big apartment complexes over 100 units each. So I've done very well with all of those, but for most people, the simple single-family home is just, it's been historically a largely overlooked asset class. Now, I know some people watching this may not think that, but by and large, until the Great Recession 12 years ago or so, the single-family home was overlooked as an institutional asset. So most people think of investing as, Wall Street, Goldman Sachs, or these Wall Street firms. And they didn't pay attention to single-family homes at all. Life insurance companies are big real estate investors. They didn't pay attention to single-family homes. Now, that is changing. And there are many companies now that own thousands and thousands, even tens of thousands of single-family homes. But in terms of the overall number of single-family rental properties, they are still a drop in the bucket. They are nothing. I mean, there are about, I think now 18 million or so single-family homes owned by investors. And the percentage of the companies like Invitation Homes or American Homes for Rent, who do own tens of thousands of properties, overall in the marketplace, they're still almost not a blip on the radar. They are getting bigger, and this asset class is now getting a lot of attention from institutional investors, and it was previously ignored. So there we are.
All right, so you're in commercial, all kinds of real estate, but since you've said you think the bread and butter is the single-family home, how do you get started?
The great thing about single-family homes is they can't, or housing in general, it can't be outsourced. They can ship the manufacturing overseas, and workers in China can manufacture. They can ship the call centers and the office work to India and the Philippines. They can ship or outsource retail to the internet, right? But at the end of the day, everybody needs a place to live. And we saw this become especially true in the times of the pandemic, where the house was literally the center of the universe. And now with people able to work at home, that is even more true than it has ever been in history. So I think that's bodes very well for housing, especially single-family housing. And in terms of how to get started, it all starts with just buying one property. It's not hard to do. There are all kinds of gurus out there preaching nothing down. That is possible, but it is difficult. And it usually requires someone spending a lot of time looking for that very unique situation, for that very unique seller that can sell a property with no money down or little money down. It's not impossible, but it does take a lot of time and effort and maybe a lot of direct mail programs or telemarketing or knocking on doors or whatever, right? So barring that, just doing it the traditional way, as of today, someone with about $25,000 can buy a single family home and finance it the traditional way with a conventional lender, putting maybe 20% down or even as little as 15% down. And those requirements change over time. So the pendulum goes back and forth on how much the down payment needs to be and how hard it is to qualify and so forth. But just buy that first property and make sure you understand and learn the fundamentals of real estate investing. Back in about 2004, 2005, I created a framework, and I just decided to, for the lack of a better name, I called it the 10 Commandments of Successful Investing. And we are now up to 23 of the 10 Commandments, just so you know, because I keep adding them. But the 10 are really the core. And so a couple of those that really resonate with people is, number one, well, not commandment number one, but one that has resonated the most is commandment number 3, thou shalt maintain control. And what I mean there is don't relinquish control to somebody else. When you're investing in general, and not necessarily single-family home investing, just investing in general, you want to be in control of that asset. If you're investing in stocks or bonds or mutual funds, you're relinquishing control to somebody else. A whole series of people are in the middle of that deal. They might be a crook. They can commit fraud. Bernie Madoff is obviously a very famous story, but there's also Enron, WorldCom, Global Crossing. There are a whole bunch of them. Wall Street is riddled with scandals. So you've got that problem. You might be investing with a crook. Number 2 problem, you might be investing with an idiot. And just because of their sheer incompetence, you'll lose money. Number 3 problem is assuming they're honest and competent, they take a big management fee off the top for managing the deal. And so maintaining control, one thing definitely. But the other thing is just the basic fundamentals of investing. Understand something I call the RV ratio, or the rent to value ratio. It's a very quick rule of thumb. And for example, you might not want to be investing in your own city where you live, because if you live in a city that is a more expensive city, whether it be anywhere on the west coast of the United States, the expensive northeastern markets, or South Florida where I live, those markets don't make any sense. The properties that make sense for investment are bread and butter houses, necessity type housing, okay? Inexpensive houses with good rent to value ratios. So for example, you want to get as close to 1% of the value of the property each month as you can. Now in this market, because things have been appreciating so quickly, and prices always precede rents, rents always lag. It takes a few years for rents to catch up, and they are catching up, but that's going to take some time. So it's very hard on a quality property today to get 1% of the value per month. For example, $200,000 property, $2,000 per month. That's hard to do right now. But as the rents catch up and the prices maybe stop going up so quickly, those will come in line. And they always do, and then they get out of whack, and over time, that equation is always rebalancing itself. So rent to value ratio. Another thing I'd say, it's very important to diversify geographically, like I talked about before. You want to take that most historically proven asset class, income property, but diversify geographically. You never want to invest in a one-horse town, where there's one big industry or one big employer, or it's a small town. There are some opportunities in those types of things, but they take extra knowledge and extra care and maybe extra risk, okay? But a diversified employment base, ideally a city over 500,000 people, maybe over 1 million. There's more resources, there's more data, there's more momentum for that city. Obviously a place with in-migration, meaning a place people want to move, not a place people are leaving. If you look at what's happening now in these business-unfriendly areas, my former home, the Socialist Republic of California, as I like to say, people are leaving, right? Or at least people who earn income and pay taxes are leaving. So those are places that I would avoid. I would avoid places like New York City, same problem. So business-friendly places also tend to be landlord-friendly places, where the courts and the regulatory environment will uphold contracts. So if, and everyone's going to have one eventually, or maybe more than one, if you get a bad tenant, you can get them out so you can start collecting rent again. And the court will get them out of there for you. But in a place like California, New York, for example, very difficult. The tenants have all the rights. The landlords are the big evil land baron, and you don't want to be perceived that way.
That's some truly wonderful, specific advice, and thank you. Earlier you said control,
Yeah.
right? So as you diversify in different geographic areas, how easy is it how do you keep control?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So when you're diversifying around the country, because you're not near the properties, a lot of people think they're relinquishing control. So a few things I say to that person. Number one, I remember I used to be just a local investor. And when I didn't understand it very well, I would suffer very low return on investment because I would invest near where I lived, and I lived in an expensive area in Newport Beach, California. So I remember I had one property in Irvine, the next door city, and that property, I rented it myself, chose the tenant, put them in there myself, and they were there for 3 years. And when they moved out, I went to go inspect the property. And I realized when I walked into the property that I had not been there for 3 years. And so I thought, if this, and this was only like 10 minutes from my office, if this was 10 hours from my office or 3,000 miles, it wouldn't have mattered, okay? Because it doesn't. See, here's the thing people have to realize. If you want to be an investor, be an investor. Don't be a person who is going to meet the tenant, who is swinging a hammer or is tempted to pick up a paintbrush or clean the house. You're not an investor then. You're a painter, a housekeeper, or a handyman. You don't want to do that. You want to invest arm's length to be an investor. It makes you a much more disciplined, real investor. And nowadays, with all this great technology we have, there are so many tools that allow people to invest in an arm's length way and manage things from a distance. There are just a whole suite of tools that we use and recommend for our clients. And we also vet and recommend property management for them, or we teach them how to self-manage properties from a long distance. Let me give you an example of that. So this one property that I still own is in San Antonio, Texas. And how far is that from California? Maybe almost 2,000 miles, maybe 1,600 miles or something, right? And I've never seen that property. I bought it remotely. I've still never seen it, and I've owned it 16 years now. And I remember I had a property manager, and the property manager decided he was going to retire and get out of the business. And I had my assistant, look for a new property manager, and she found one that she liked, and put the contract on my desk. And I just didn't get around to signing it. I was too busy. And what do you know? The first of the month rolls around, and I get a nice note from the tenant with a check saying, "Hi, Jason. I hear that the property manager has retired. Here is this month's rent, and if you ever need anything, call me." This is the tenant saying this to me. Right? And so I called him up, introduced myself, and I guess I was now self-managing my property by accident. A property I had never seen, a tenant I had never met, and that tenant stayed for several years. And it was a great relationship. I find that the tenants, most tenants are really good people. There are a few bad ones, obviously. But most are good people, and they just want a good place to live at a fair price, and they will do a lot of the work for you. So they, when something breaks, for example, they'll either fix it, sometimes, or they'll call and get a couple of estimates and recommend the best one for you. It's absolutely not that difficult to just self-manage these properties from a long distance. I will say though, most of our clients haven't come around to that. Some have, and I recommend it, but for others, they can just use a property manager. And there's a whole bunch of tactics we teach them of how to keep their property manager honest, how to keep their property manager in line, and all of that kind of stuff. So that's something we help them with.
I'd like you had me really intrigued with your commandments.
Yeah.
You gave us a couple of them, 3 of them. Can you go back?
Yeah. So couple more of the commandments for investing, right? One I think is thou shalt only invest in tax-favored assets. So taxes are the single largest expense in almost anybody's life. It's amazing to me that people will spend a whole bunch of time shopping around for a new TV or a new car or whatever, right? They'll spend all this time researching, shopping around, yet they won't learn about taxes. When I talk about taxation, most people, unless they're in the business, their eyes roll back in their head, they want to fall asleep, they get really bored. But taxes are an area where you want to minimize your exposure. And income property is the most tax-favored asset class in America. So it is incumbent on everybody to learn something about taxation, to understand a little bit of the tax code. There are just, several easy principles that can save people a lot of money on this wonderful tax-favored asset class. So that would be one other. Another thing is, thou shalt maximize leverage to basically accelerate return on investment and reduce risk. Now, what do I mean by leverage? Leverage is debt, and I call debt my favorite 4-letter word. So the reason debt is so important for real estate is, number one, real estate is the most debt-friendly asset class in America. And I don't have any personal debt other than my mortgages on my properties. So I don't believe in consumer debt. But when it comes to debt on income-producing properties, it can be a very, very powerful tool. Let me give you one example. There's a principle I teach called inflation-induced debt destruction. And I know that's a mouthful, inflation-induced debt destruction. But people love this one, and here's the idea behind it. When we take on this wonderful 30-year mortgage on a property, we get a very low interest rate because it's essentially subsidized by the government. Since the end of World War II and the Great Depression, the government has been very focused on helping home buyers. So they created 2 big organizations we've all heard of to do that, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And that is very unique to America. Other countries do not have this, okay? And when someone borrows on a mortgage, they're essentially borrowing at negative interest rates. Because if you look at what real inflation is, now the most widely used measure for inflation is the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, and we've all heard of that. And so the CPI might say that inflation is around, now it's higher at the moment, but it might say, generally it's maybe around 3%, where the Fed has a target of 2%. But the reality is that is vastly understated. And there are huge incentives for the government to understate inflation and make it seem lower than it really is. I can go into that if you wish. But they do it in 3 ways. They basically manipulate that index lower than it really is through weighting, substitution, and hedonic indexing. So let's just go with an official rate of inflation, and let's say it's 2%. Okay, like sometime during normal times, they'll say it's around 2%. Well, if you're borrowing at only 3%, that means you're basically getting a discount where you're only paying 1% net in real interest rate. You take the interest rate you're paying, 3%, and then you take the inflation rate, 2%, and so the net of that is only 1%. That's the rate you're paying. But wait, there's more. So that interest is tax deductible in most cases, right? Yeah. So If it's 3%, about half of it is interest. That means, and if you, depending on what state you live in and what your tax bracket is, for most people, you might end up somewhere around close to 50%. So that means 1.5% is deductible. So let's take that off first. We got 3% minus 1.5% minus, so now we're at 1.5 minus 2% inflation. So now we've got a negative interest rate of 0.5%. We're getting paid to borrow money. This is incredible. This is the
I like how you light up.
I love this. It's the hidden wealth creator. Most people think they make money on real estate because the real estate goes up in value. But what really happens is the debt goes down in value. Inflation-induced debt destruction, it's one of the secrets of the wealthy. With rental properties, we don't even pay our own debts. We outsource that obligation of debt repayment to someone called a tenant. The tenants pay the debt. So quite literally, if they pay the debt and we're borrowing at negative interest rates, and remember, that example I gave was only based on the official rate of inflation. The real rate is much higher, which makes the deal much better, okay? So with that, we're getting paid to borrow and someone is paying our debt for us. It's absolutely incredible. This is what's called self-liquidating debt. Let's take this back to Wall Street for a moment. Remember in the 80s that all these corporate raiders became famous in the famous movie Wall Street?
Sure.
You know, greed is good,
Greed
et cetera,
is good.
right? Yeah. And so you heard about T. Boone Pickens, Carl Icahn, and you still hear about some of these people, you know, and all these corporate raiders. So one of the techniques these big Wall Street tycoons use is called the LBO, and that stands for leveraged buyout. And essentially what that means is they acquire a company and they load that company up that they're acquiring with debt, and then they pay off that debt with the company's revenue. Well, that's exactly what we do as real estate investors. We're all doing a bunch of leveraged buyouts because that debt we take on with our rental properties is something I call self-liquidating debt, okay? The debt liquidates itself. I would hate debt if I had to repay the debt.
Sure.
But I don't have to repay the debt. The tenants pay the debt and inflation pays the debt. So it's getting paid twice. Now, what other business anywhere in the world can capture 33 to 40% of someone's income every single month? Apple Computer doesn't do that. There is no business that does that except housing. Think about it. Every single month, your tenant is paying 33 to 40% of their income to you, the landlord. That's incredible. You know, no other business can capture that much of someone's income as rental property. So it's a truly amazing asset class. It's got these multi-dimensional characteristics that other asset classes just don't have. If you think about your other options, right? Non-dividend paying stocks. The whole strategy is buy low, sell high. Precious metals, gold, silver, whatever. Buy low, sell high. That's it. Cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, buy low, sell high. That's the whole strategy for all those things. With income property, multi-dimensional strategy. Buy low, sell high, get your tenants to pay the debt, self-liquidating debt, inflation-induced debt destruction, tax advantages, monthly cash flow beyond the debt. We didn't even talk about that, called positive cash flow. There are so many things that make it such a very special asset class. There's just nothing else like it.
Amen. You're a font of knowledge. You have quite a few resources for us, don't you? Can you run down some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So my main website is just my name, jasonhartman.com. And I have a YouTube channel, a podcast called The Creating Wealth Show. So the podcast or the videos are a great resource too. And then my website, jasonhartman.com.
Outstanding. Now, and you've been fabulous. You're wonderful, but I think, can we take a moment and bring the brains behind the operation
sure,
up front?
Yeah. let's bring our best salesperson.
There we go.
Come here. And this is our mascot, our company mascot. This is Coco.
Hello, Coco. Thanks for coming. Thanks for letting us borrow Jason.
Yeah.
Jason, thanks so much for taking time with us. It's been a delight listening to you. I can't wait to jump on your website and listen to your podcast and learn more.
Good. Thank you.
That completes James's interview with Jason Hartman. What I love about Jason is that he's not just someone who's created success in his own life, but his way to communicate his principles and how he acts on them and how he created that success, I think, is something that is unique in his ability to be able to communicate that. So I'm really glad that you were here to experience it, and thanks for watching. Next up, James interviews Ken McElroy, who is the CEO of MC Companies. Ken is not only a real estate investor himself, but he teaches other people how to succeed in real estate investment. So this is someone you really want to pay attention to. This is part one of a two-part interview. Enjoy.
Ken, I'm excited to talk to you. I've heard a lot of good things. We're blessed to have you here because you are everything we need. You're a real estate expert, investor, educator, author. You kind of got all the boxes checked for us. So before we get too into it, since this is not about me, if you could tell us a little bit about you, your real estate experience, background, and how we ended up here.
Certainly. Yeah. Thank you. So I started like a lot of people, I think. I grew up in the Northwest Seattle area, and I got into college on an athletic scholarship, and I ended up managing a property for free rent. And because as you know, I had student debts, and I free rent was very, very appealing. And how hard can it be to collect rent and manage property? So anyway, that's what I first got into real estate, oddly enough. And I actually liked it. I really liked it. I grew up, my dad was a contractor, my mom was a hairdresser, and so me just being in college was a big thing. And I ended up one day meeting the owner of that property. The owner came in, and I had turned it around. So I knew what to do. I grew up, painting and cleaning and working with my dad, and, I knew construction. So I was able to fix the property and kind of, fill it up with people that would pay, as opposed to some of the people that weren't there, that weren't paying. And the owner showed up one day, and he drove up in this really nice Mercedes, and I'll never forget, it was a 560 SEL. And I was like, that is a nice car. And he comes in, he shakes my hand, and he said, thank you. I appreciate everything you're doing. And I started getting into a little discussion with him about, how it all worked. Even though I had gone through school and was going through school, I don't think that the dots were connecting for me, at least on the accounting and the math and the finance and the stuff that I had been taking in class. And I at that moment, I said to myself, James, I said, I am on the wrong side of this desk. How do I be on that side? And that's when I started my journey. I got my real estate license, and I went to work for a property management company, the one that I actually was working for after college. I never really wanted to be picked into like a corporate job, because I personally, even at the time, I felt like I had the least ability to dictate my own future, both financially and educationally and all that kind of stuff, and travel and all the things that I had seen some of my friends do. They were kind of caught up in that corporate grind, of moving up, and that just wasn't appealing for me. So this was a great industry for me, and I ended up buying my first rental, a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, with my own money. And then I did one more, and I ran out of money. So, and then I'm like, okay, how do I scale this? And that's when I had to learn how to buy bigger properties, raise capital, and find deals and put them into business plans for investors, and kind of really focus on cash flow. And what I was really trying to do is I was trying to figure out a way to have enough cash flow to replace my expenses. So I guess financially free at the time, even though there wasn't really a word then. I was just trying to figure out a way. Okay, if I get enough cash flow, I can cover my expenses. And from there, I just scaled it to, the company that it's now at, and we're, well over $1 billion of assets. We have 250 employees, and we basically build and buy rental properties on the Western United States. And that's what we do full time. It's turned into just an incredible, remarkable business for me.
Congratulations. Well
Thanks.
done. So I got to ask, what sport did you go to college for?
I was a wrestler. Yeah. We have a limited, there's a limited bandwidth for wrestlers. I went to the Olympic trials, and I realized I was not good enough to make it to the next level. After that, man, there's not a lot.
No, and the UFC hadn't come along quite yet for you.
Right.
Well, from one wrestler to another, thanks for being here. Yeah. So that first property that you were managing while going to school, did the school find that job for you, or did you just find it on your own?
No, completely lucky. A friend of mine that I had gone to high school with, his brother was working for the management company, and I was staying in touch with them, and he said, hey, would you be interested in renting and taking over this property? We'll give you free rent and a little bit of money for your time. And so I, of course, moved right in, because obviously free rent, at that point, when, at that age is a big deal. And so it was completely a relationship from high school.
It's a really fortuitous way to get started. I mean, while you're still going to school, you have limited time, but you kind of got your feet wet right away. Can you go back and remember some lessons learned? Because you said you ended up having to rehab it a little bit and change tenants.
It was a lot more work than I ever imagined. I'm not kidding. It was. I ended up, well, first of all, there were a lot of units that had not been turned to rent ready. So, just somebody had moved out. There was a fair amount of damage and some of those, and some of them didn't have a fair amount of damage, but you have everything from the flooring to the paint to the maintenance, all that stuff. And, I guess I was kind of naive. I just went in and did all that work. I'm like, okay, well, I need to go, get these ready and put good people in them. And I didn't realize the time that you could actually hire people to go do all that stuff. And because I never grew up that way. We never had a service person or anybody come to our home ever. So for me, it was just go in, fix it, clean it up. And so there was months and months of basically cleanup. And I did know that obviously if the place shows well, it's going to rent faster and you're going to get a higher rent. It's just kind of common sense. And so just slowly but surely, I ended up just knocking these things out on the weekends and the evenings, whenever I had free time, and ended up filling the property up slowly. And then of course we had our problem tenants in there as well. There's a lot of colorful stories around that, of course, and people, there were some people dealing drugs, and there were lots of people that hadn't paid, and were doing all kinds of things that were disruptive. So I had to handle all of those things. And thankfully I was young and probably dumb, because I was knocking on doors in the middle of the night and, that kind of stuff. And I don't know that I would want to do that today, but certainly it was a good win for me. It was a really, really lucky break for me.
Well, and back then you were a wrestler, you were a bulldog, you didn't mind.
Yeah, I was looking for those.
How many units was it?
It was 60.
So your first little part-time gig was pretty big.
Yeah, it was 60 units, and there was a lot happening, and I ended up having somebody help me as well. So I ended up bringing somebody else on, which was really, really helpful, because I couldn't handle it all in the beginning. But the truth is, once you get these kind of rolling and you get people that are in there that care about the place, they rent, they take care of the place, they pay you on time, things can actually be pretty smooth on the property management side.
So how'd you locate those tenants?
Well, I was located right downtown Seattle, so literally right almost below the Space Needle. And so it was one of those locations where it was just people were walking by all the time. So for me, all I had to do is go out and get some A boards and stick them out on the sidewalks, and clean up the front and make sure that and then be available. Back then we had the cordless phone, so I had a cordless phone on my hip and running around the property. People would, buzz the front door, and I'd run down and, show them a unit, and, hope, and at that point, man, the rubber hits the road. Like you either sell it, you don't sell it. There's a lot going on, and it's the school kind of meets the real world, like I had never been in any kind of environment like that, but you learn kind of quickly, what to do.
So the owner didn't provide you with many tools?
Oh, no, no.
You just
no, gosh, no. I think he came by maybe once or twice in 2 or 3 months.
So you were just thrown into this?
Yeah, 100%. Now, they did have a management company. And as I had mentioned, my friend's brother worked for that management company. But management companies are often very busy too. So it was nice. They had a support service, and that was super helpful. So we had the accounting systems that they provided that I had to follow and learn, on coding the bills and collecting the money and going to the banks and deposits and rolling that all up into a financial statement, which again, in college, you kind of go through those classes, but you don't really understand until that very moment, what a income and expense statement is and a balance sheet and all those things until you're actually, kind of doing it. And so I did have, luckily, it was managed by a management company that offered support.
All right. So there were systems in place.
Yeah, they and that was very helpful.
Yeah, with 60 doors, if you don't have systems, you're swimming upstream.
Yes.
So what was your major when you started?
I was a business major, so
Okay,
it was perfect. Yeah, it was perfect for me. And I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to, my dad had worked for somebody most of his life and then had started his own business toward the tail end of his career. And I got a little taste of that, of what it was like. He worked a lot and while he was growing it. But he also had this, you have unlimited ability to make money, have freedom, get some of your time back, and not necessarily be that 9 to 5. And so it was very, very attractive for me to be able to be in that business that I knew that I could scale it and also have the freedom to go, kind of spend the time where I needed to spend the time, where I wanted to spend time.
Yeah, so it was the path to the life you wanted.
It was, yes.
All right, so you've managed this 60 unit place. You got a taste of it. You've learned a lot, and then you decided to go out and buy your first property. What was your first property?
Yeah, so what I was doing was I ended up working for that company for I think 8 years as a property manager. So right out of college, and I was flying all over the place, Las Vegas. I was down in Portland, and we were down in Northern California. And we were basically managing properties. And so I had a really nice opportunity. That was my first and only job. And I ended up learning so much. I managed literally, I want to say it was 15 to 20,000 units during that time, all over the place. And this company was progressive. It was growing, it was based in Seattle, and it was obviously all up and down the Washington and Oregon corridor there along Interstate 5. But then it was also expanding. And so the owner of the company asked me to open a new office. And I was the ripe age of, I think, 26 or 27. So I moved to Las Vegas. And ironically, I'd never been to Las Vegas. I moved there and started a division of their office from Las Vegas. Again, didn't know what to do. I had to hire accountants and receptionists and find office space and all that stuff. And we started a property management business there. And then after a number of years working for a property management company and doing that, that's when I took the leap and said, I'm going to start my own firm. I moved to Scottsdale, which is where I live now, because I like the climate here. And that's in that first year, that's where I ended up investing in my very first property. And it was, I think it was around $160,000, $170,000. It was a 2-bedroom. And I want to say that I probably had like 30 grand or something I had put down at the time, and it barely cash flowed. And, but I knew that it needed to cash flow. And obviously I knew how to keep it full. So that was my very first property. And then from there, I did it again. But then, what happens is you can only invest as much money as you save. And I only had really at the time I was growing my business, so I had that income, and I had some savings from my prior career with the management firm. But basically the only way to scale was to save, and so that's when I really had to learn, how am I going to be able to buy some of these bigger properties? And I know that there are people out there because I had managed for a lot of them. And one of the great things about property management is, like the example in the first story, that investor, he owned the building, and it was his and a bunch of his friends' monies that owned the building. And so you start to learn, how that all works. And, and as I started to manage all these other properties, they're basically partnerships. They basically find the properties, put the partnerships together with the equity, and then find somebody that can turn it around and manage it better and produce a return for their equity. So, so I had a nice run of learning all that in the management company. And so I was pretty much ready to go out and find a property, buy it, and put together a partnership. So once I got a few single families under my belt, I jumped right into the multifamily space. And my first acquisition was a 182 unit property in Sun City, Arizona. And I still own it, actually. So I bought it for $11 million way back. And I think I raised $2 million. And it's probably worth, I don't know, maybe 25 or 30 now, something like that. Yeah. So I'm a buy and hold guy. I believe in cash flow, and it's hard to find deals. And I like the cash flow from those deals. And I probably refinanced that property 4 or 5 times, I would guess. And, I just keep harvesting the equity tax free.
So that acquisition, now you're going commercial.
Yeah. So
how different was that game?
So it's interesting. It's actually a lot easier. It's a lot more sophisticated. I know it because it's bigger and they're bigger numbers, but what happens is all of a sudden they move away from me being the guarantor of the loan. Now I still have to sign, but they look at the property as the collateral. And so on a single family, oftentimes they're looking at you as, if there's a default, they're looking at you. But on the bigger properties, they look at the property. So if I screwed the whole thing up and lost it all, then they still would have the asset. And, the investors would lose all their money, and that would be horrible. But that's what the banks wanted. And of course, I was a guarantor as well. And so that was one of the biggest aha moments for me, is that there's a lot of managed money, what I call OPM, or other people's money, that is trying to find investments either on the debt or the equity side. In other words, all day long, we have investors wanting to invest with us, and for a multitude of reasons. And the same thing on the debt. On these kinds of projects, we'll have 6, 8, 10 people bidding on the debt. Trying to, it's the same thing on the home single family homes. Like these mortgage companies. It seems like they're a dime a dozen. And there's a lot of money in that business if they can place it in good collateral. So that was one of the biggest aha moments. And then the other one was that my property management skills, everything that I had learned in the property management world, kind of all got put on the line right then. And the thing about property management is if you take on a property from somebody and it doesn't improve, then you get fired. If you take it on and it goes down in performance, you get fired. If you take it on and you improve it, they sell it and you get fired. So in the property management world, like you're constantly, there's only one thing you can do, and that's improve it. And so I had learned all these skills, and I didn't really know how many. And so I went in and I saw the problem. I fixed it. I created massive value in the property. I think we bought it for 11, and we turned it into about, I think it was around 14 million of value by all these little things that property managers can do. And then I was able to do a cash out refinance and give the investors their money back. And of course, the first thing they say is, would you do that again? And I had been doing that with other, as a property manager. I had been in the middle of that. So I had been in the middle of, all of those things. And so I just inserted myself in and started to reap the rewards from doing it directly.
So when you started your own company, it was property management, but you knew you were going to acquire properties that you were going to, for you to manage?
Yeah. So the first thing I needed when you start a company, of course, you have zero income, So the first thing I needed was income. And so I went out and I found multiple properties to manage for a fee. And it was just me and a receptionist. And I was hustling, trying to find accounts and trying to grow that. And then all of the things happen from when you grow a business and, accounting and, and communication and all the things that, and the HR issues and all the stuff, as you're growing. And so I learned how to do all that in my first business. And then I ended up buying one of those properties later on. So I actually bought a property that I was managing and still own it today.
How much did college prepare you? How valuable was that education? And
I think wrestling prepared me the most.
That's a life skill.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of education, but sitting in a classroom listening to, one of the things I learned is, who are your teachers? And so I think sometimes if I had teachers that were actually out in the real world, I gravitated to them, and I was doing internships and stuff in college as well. But, the ones that didn't have any practical experience but were teaching a subject that, they're kind of tough, because literally it's just sitting and listening and going through a book. And I don't want to discount that knowledge that you do gain. But for me, I always gained more from the teachers that were out actually, because then you could actually, how did you apply this? How did it work? You can get into the kind of the nuts and bolts. And so, college did a lot of things for me, and certainly it provided discipline. And I had to do well to stay on the team. I had to, meet my deadlines and all those kinds of things. And I wouldn't call myself a great student, by the way. So, but I did make it through.
And I like what you said, because so much of classroom's theory, and you need to know how to actually do it, and because it's all about taking action, right?
Yeah, that was right. Yeah, and as you know, like when you're in a position with not very much oversight, which is the kind of everything I've described, you have to figure it out. Otherwise, you're going to go down. And my parents, they bless them, but they didn't have financial means, and I didn't grow up around any of that, and I certainly didn't have any friends that had any of that. And so, it's a sink or swim, moments. And so you have to dig deep within yourself and figure it out. There are plenty of people out there that will help you. That's been my experience. There's mentors and teachers all over this place. If you ask, if you have the courage to ask, and you don't have the ego in front of you to ask.
That's a big piece of it, right? Literally everyone we've talked to has talked about the importance of finding somebody who's already done it so you don't have to repeat all the mistakes. And I guess with how you got started, you had a business owner who owned big properties, and he was willing. I'm listening to you and I'm kind of giggling, thinking you were a victim of your own success. Because that first property that you went in and fixed because you had a construction background and you got good people in, he loved you, and like, okay, Ken can do it. So he kept giving you bigger jobs, assuming you'll just figure it out.
Yeah. And I did it. And honestly, I love that. I love going in and it's really, property management is pretty common sense. And most of the issues that surround real estate are based around that. They're based around the tenant, who's in there, and all the things that can, go on as a result of that. So there are things that you learn as you start to fix properties, fill up properties, and value properties. And there are also things that you learn, James, that, when you buy them. So like, I just bought a property in Houston, Texas, about 2 months ago. It was I was actually two properties, 648 units. And back, you remember in one of the hurricanes that the levee, the water had kind of held the levee back. Well, they released the levee, it flooded this whole valley in the Houston area. And so all those homes, all those retail places, all those apartments, they all got fixed basically on the lower floors. And so, there was like $40 million of insurance work that was spent on this property on all the downstairs. Well, all the upstairs were still original. So I'm like, okay, this is perfect, because all we got to do is put the capital in on the top, and we already know what the rents are on the bottom. So, on basically 320 some units, we're able to, improve the tops and raise the rents. And so what that is, it's a $20 million value add. And so, just by being able to raise the rents by $180 to $220 per unit, just by improving them. Now you have to spend the money on it. So, it costs $8 million to do all that work, but then you increase the value a lot. And so it's those kinds of things that, that are so apparent to me now from having been in property management years ago. And there's a whole list of things that on that one property that I can go into, and other properties that I see when I see a package from a broker or from a seller. I see the opportunities, not all of them all the time, but I see a lot of them. And so when I try to buy things, that I can increase value immediately. So I don't buy a property and hope that it goes up. I don't think that that's a good strategy, actually. And now sometimes you can buy a property that has, let's say, high vacancy or high expenses, or maybe the property manager or the seller is not running it very well, and you can turn it around. That's one way to increase value if they sell it to you based on those numbers. But the best way to do it is what I call forced equity, which is, the example I just shared. And there's a lot of opportunity out there, and be able to take something and reposition it in the market and make a lot of money for your investors, and ultimately for yourself if you see it on the front end and then you execute.
Can you walk through an example of one of those?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I bought a 680 unit building in San Antonio from Bank of America, and it had been defaulted by a seller. And so it was bank owned.
How'd you find it? Did they come to you, or?
So this was early 07, 08. So what happens is when you're looking in an area, you basically find all the people that list properties or own properties, and banks are part of those. During that time they were. And the brokers, of course, are trying to sell things. The problem is not a lot of people are buying during that time, because as you know, in 08, 09, things were still kind of crashing. But in this particular case, there was just a national brokerage company. And I flew down, I looked at the property. It had 320 units vacant out of 680. And it was collecting like 50% or something like that. There was deferred maintenance all over the place. It's on 40 acres. It's just a mess. We had flooded units, fire units, problems with the roofs, problems with the tenants, and it was owned by a bank. And this is actually, oddly enough, it can be common in certain market cycles. And so the bank is sitting there with this $25 million debt, which was what they prior borrower owed them. And, but it was now bank owned. So we were able to get the bank to write down the note. And then I was able to put another $8 million into the property. It took about 1.5 to 2 years. So we were about 28 million into that property. And when we were done, it was worth about 40. And so, and so and all I did, and I say all I did, I mean our team did it, is that we get the people out that can't pay or are destructive or causing problems. You fix the units one by one, literally appliances, flooring, paint, whatever it is, and you have a system and a routine, and you move through the property either building by building or unit by unit or whatever we kind of decide how to orchestrate it. And it could take well over a year and a half. At the same token, we had another 100 people move because, they had another, they had some people in there that probably shouldn't have been in there. So there's all these creative things, you got the construction folks in there fixing things, the renovation guys doing things. And, that's all mapped out, all bid out. It's, you don't just buy it and then figure that out and, and raise a bunch of money. It's all super budgeted. And then you manage the process just like you would anything, just like a home rehab. And except, you might have 400 of them and you just move through, and then you kick on the marketing piece and you rent them, obviously right behind the renovations. And so what we were able to do was we were able to take $8 million of investor money, put it into the property, make it into about and when I say 40 million, all that really means is that it's stabilized, so we bought it for a big discount because it was a mess and we stabilized it. So what does that mean? It means like 95% occupancy and managed expenses. So then you go back to the bank and they do an appraisal and they say, they gave us a $40 million value. So then what we do is we put a $30 million loan on it. And so what does that do? The $30 million loan gives back the $8 million to the investors, pays off the 20 that we owed Bank of America. And we had a couple $1 million more. So now that's what I call, infinite return. That's we're into the property for zero. We don't owe anything to anybody except the $30 million debt. So we don't have any investors. They're still owners though, but we don't owe the investors any money. So that's a property I've owned for, 10 plus years now. I think it's worth around over 60 million at the moment. And so, so the investors get that money back tax-free because it's a cash out refi, just like you would do on your home. So, if you got a HELOC or a line of credit against your home equity, it's not taxed because it's debt. You actually owe it. So we use debt to replace out the debt and the equity. And that's been our model the whole time is we have these investors invest, they get their money back, say 3 to 4 years later. And obviously they're very happy. And they, what do they say? They say, can you do that again? And so then that's the whole mission of our company is to try to find properties like that where we can go do it again.
So you find projects and then I'm sure you've got scads of people now who are waiting for you to find that project so they can invest in because you're getting them a good return. And what's the timeline generally?
Yeah, it's all over the map. So there can be properties that are relatively easy. It can be a year turnaround. There are some that can take much longer, depending on the level of work that's needed. If it's just a management turnaround, it's easily a year. Now that doesn't necessarily mean they'll get their money back in a year. And right now, James, during this kind of heated time, we're not able to return 100% of the capital like we were before because we're actually having to pay a little bit more for the properties because there's so many people bidding on them. So, but back in the day, that's how we built our whole company was, trying to return 100% of the capital so that the investors had all their money back tax-free. So they give us the money, we give it back to them, and then they still benefit from the cash flow from the properties. It just depends on the time. We do ground up construction too. So we have a division in our firm. We have five projects going right around 200 million in construction. That's a 3-year till stabilization. So it takes a year to year and a half to build it, depending on the size, and then it takes a year to a year and a half to fill it up with people and stabilize it and kind of get the expenses and the income in line. And then you take that to the bank and then you put a permanent loan on it. And at that point, that's a cash out refi again. So you pay off your construction loan, you pay off your investor equity.
So, these are big numbers. For those of us on this side of the fence who are just getting started, want to get started, just getting started, investing in projects like that. For me, I'm kind of interested in that because my wife and I are nomadic. We like being traveling. So we don't want to be there hands-on all the time. And this sounds like a good way to invest in real estate. And I've been pleasantly surprised because these numbers are so big, but the minimum investment is usually about what?
100 to 200. Yeah, it's usually in the 100 to 200,000 range. But I'll tell you, like during all this chaos, I'll tell you a deal that I just did on the side. There's deals all the time. So I own a lot of billboards, and billboards, produce revenue, and they're real estate. Now, people don't think of them as real estate, but most cities don't like billboards. Most of the time they don't want any more. And so they're kind of limited in supply, but especially in these growing metros. So I own a number of them. And so I found one in the city of Phoenix across the street from the Bank One ballpark, which is where the Diamondbacks play and all that. And it was a two-sided board called a static board. The static board means basically two sides. And so what's happening is everything's being converted to digital. So now I'm like, okay, what an opportunity to do a value add. Again, forced equity. So bought the billboard for $275. I didn't need partners or anything. Except my partner Ross, who's my partner in MC, we did it together. Then we had to pay another $125 to put a digital board up, and we had to use an attorney, and we had to go through the permit process and all that. Took a little while. And we put a digital billboard up, and we hired a company so now we get 4 ads per side every 15 seconds as opposed to just the 2 static. So we did all that work, and we're into the total board for, right around 400,000 to 500,000, I think. And along comes Clear Channel, and they said, we want that board. And so we put it into escrow and closed for $1.5 million on that, and we sold it. I actually would have been fine not selling it and keeping the cash flow because it does cash flow. And but they wanted it, so so we made $1 million on that board, and it started with a $275,000 investment, which you can do yourself or you can find through a small group of friends. But the process, James, is the most important piece. It's what I saw. I saw the whole thing. I saw the static board to the digital board. I knew that it would generate more revenue because it has more ads. Obviously, you can run more ads through, and that did happen. And then all of a sudden, Clear Channel came along and said, "We want that board. It's across from the stadium, and it's digital now." And they could have done that. Anybody could have done that. And so, that's how I cut my teeth. And that's how a lot of people cut their teeth, is on small deals like that don't get a lot of attention. But, that's how I started years ago. And I still do stuff like that. I just love this business so much because if you see the end, if you're buying something and just hope that the market carries it, then you could be sorely disappointed.
You're gambling.
If you find something that you can breathe life into and fix and change and and make it better, then you actually force and create your own value, and those opportunities are everywhere.
It's kind of fun because you're the first one we've talked to that mentioned billboards as real estate. Yeah. And I remember reading not that long ago that there's some real wealth out there, like Warren Buffett, that has its roots in billboards.
I know. Yeah, there's a bunch of guys here in Phoenix that, a lot of those billboard guys came out of here. Carl Eller, who is, Eller and Clear Channel, and a lot of those early guys came out of here and they grew their businesses by doing this billboard. The billboards they're really, they're not big investments, and, they produce, depending on where they are, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,000 per side per ad. Just depends on, if it's on a freeway, it's going to be a lot more. If it's in if it's off freeway, it'll be a lot less. So it just kind of depends on where it is. And it, it has a lot to do with the car count and all that. It's still incredible. It's one of the last places because, newspapers have gone away and, ads in magazines and all that kind of stuff and billboards. We have so much interest from, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Nike, car dealerships, casinos, even the stadium itself. It's just amazing the amount of people that want people to know where they are, and a lot of that stuff's kind of going away, going to the internet and the phones and all that. So people that are driving in their cars right now, they're captured. I mean, I know, like, as I drive from Tucson to Phoenix, I know exactly what's going to be on the billboards, as you're cruising through. So they're pretty effective, and they're hard to get, hard to find, owned by a lot of big money, but they're out there, and I think they're entry level, honestly.
Well, it's funny because in my mind, it's an industry that's going away, but then all you got to do is get in your car and drive a little ways and realize, oh, they're still everywhere. So are there a lot of individual owners? It's not just a...
Yeah, there are. They're all over the place. So it's really obviously a lot of the big ones along the freeways. They're paying big money for the access and the rights, and then a lot of the most of that's all institutional money and really tough to compete with. But there's a lot of small guys that are out there, buying these little things like me, and I have a couple partners in them, and they've been great. And I mean, honestly, they've been great, and they cash flow, because once you put an ad up there, obviously you have to get payment, but these are casinos and car dealers, and they're not paying you. They're excited to be where they are, and they have these advertising budgets, and maybe they're paying you $1,000 to $2,000 a month, or $3,000 a month, for that 15-second ad as it rolls through as you're driving. And so it really adds up. And so there's story after story after story I have on some of the billboards that we bought, and they're all worth significantly more. It actually, my partner and I were actually thinking about not selling, because we're searching for cash flow. We don't really need the equity as much anymore, like we did when we were younger. We're actually looking for stable cash flow. Like you're out traveling around. You want that recurring check coming in. You don't want to have to be using savings or figuring out what your savings has made or your investments have made, and try to calculate all that. So that's been my model forever. Is how do we generate enough passive income? Because I think the wealth is measured by the amount of time you have, actually, not by as much money as you have.
Right.
So for me, one of the things I did is when I had a young family was I took all summer off. Every spring break, every fall break, and every summer, I dedicated 100% with my kids, and never went to work. And so when you can, it's just a choice. Yes, I could have made money during that time. Yes, I could have grown my company bigger during that time, but I had enough passive income, and I had enough going on where I could take, unplug and go build the relationships with my kids and my family that I felt was more important.
Yeah, I had a gentleman the other day who said it, I thought really succinctly. He said, look, I don't want to have to do anything, but I want the ability to do anything.
Yeah, and once you get to that point, it's magical, because you've done it yourself, and then it really, like, all the stress and all this anxiety comes off of you, and that single source of revenue. I'm a voracious reader. I all the guys I read, the Bransons and the Buffetts, and figure out all these things that they've done and the moves that they've made. And they're pretty transparent. I mean, if you can find out what Warren Buffett did from a book, you should read that book. Yeah. It's just so obvious to me. And then you can make little decisions, and those little decisions turn into big things later. And especially there's, a lot of people don't feel like they can do that, or they don't have the time to do that. Well, then that's just a choice, because you can do that at any age.
Yeah. All right, I'm sold. Right? We're sold. We want to do this. So how do we do this?
That completes James's interview with Ken McElroy. This is just, remember, part one. There's a second part coming, so make sure you tune in for that. Thanks for being here. In this next interview, James sits with Brad Sumrock. Now, why this is an important interview, so many people, when they look at real estate investment, want to look at apartment complexes, and that's exactly where this conversation goes. He's an expert in this. He teaches other people how to do this successfully, and I think it's one of the big opportunities when it comes to real estate investment. So enjoy this interview.
Brad, thanks for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you because not only are you an expert in real estate, but you're a teacher, right? I mean, you've published, you do seminars. So if you just tell us a little bit about your background, your real estate journey.
Yeah, so I never thought I'd be in real estate, first of all, because like my parents were not in real estate. My parents weren't business owners. My parents never even finished college. And so they probably wanted for me what most parents want, which is like for their kids to have a better life than they had. So I'll never forget when I was growing up, my dad dropped out of college, and I remember he made somewhere like $42,000 a year, because I remember hearing these numbers, right? And we'd be driving from Pittsburgh to Lake Erie and on our family vacation. And my mom would be saying things like, you know, your dad's boss, who's an engineer and he got his degree, is flying his family to Hawaii. And we're going to and we're going to Lake Erie again for our family vacation.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dad.
So growing up, it was just impressed upon me how like I need to be an engineer, right? I didn't even know what engineers did for a living. So that's what I did. I studied hard. I went to college. I went to engineering school, and I got a job when I was 22. And my goal at that time was to climb up the corporate ladder. And so what I found, though, is after 4 years of engineering is like, I kind of hated it. You know, I wasn't really that good at it. And I certainly wasn't juiced and passionate about it. But engineers start off as the highest starting salary. And they still do today, by the way. They start off at the highest starting salary. So I'm like, I don't want to switch careers and get a pay cut, right? So I did what anybody would do that kind of learned, you know, the path to success is going to college, is I went back and got another degree. So now I have an MBA, right? And I'm finally making six figures, and I'm, you know, kind of clawing my way up the ladder a little bit and job hopping and all that type of stuff. And then something happened I never thought would happen. I got laid off. And that was a big deal, you know. And got another job, recovered from that. And at this point in my career, I was now doing sales. So that's how I was making a little bit more money, transitioned from engineering to sales, and traveled a lot and all that type of stuff. And I actually landed the third biggest deal in company history and got like a $150,000 commission check. And I saved that money, you know, because I was taught like live below your means and all those things, right? So I saved that money. 3 months later, I got fired. Not laid off, I got fired. And so imagine like being one of the top salespeople in the company last quarter. And then, you know, in sales, they always say, what have you done for me lately? I don't know if you ever had a sales job.
Was it a quota-based thing?
Yeah, it was a quota-based thing. So my pipeline was dry. They fired me. And that's when I just decided that I needed to do something different. So I start studying for the LSAT. I'm going to go back and get a third degree.
Everything's education. Right?
Right. So, but that was the blueprint I was following. You know, just, you know, it's like
Sure.
that's the path that I knew to success. So I'm studying for the LSAT, and this is somewhere around the year 2000. And I see this book that comes out. It's a famous book. A lot of people that got started in real estate read it. You could probably guess what I'm going to say, but it was Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah.
And I read that book, and I was pissed off. I was like, my mom and dad, you didn't teach me this stuff. You know, you didn't teach me to be a business owner or an investor. You taught me to be an employee.
It's really interesting what you said, because we interviewed a guy yesterday with a degree in economics, a master's, and was a CPA. And at 30, he read Robert's book and went, what the, right? How come I don't know nothing?
Yeah.
I'm highly educated and I know nothing.
Yeah, it's crazy. So like I'm studying for the LSAT. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I took the LSAT books and I just pushed it off the desk, seriously. And I'm like, I'm not getting another degree. And at that point, I would see, like, this is back before, you know, everything was online. This is in the year 2000, 2001 time frame. And I would see ads for real estate investing seminars in the local newspaper in Houston, Texas, where I was living. And if I hadn't read that book, you would never catch me dead in the seminar, because it's like, I don't have 1 degree, I have 2 degrees. I'm not going to seminar, right? Like someone's just going to try to sell me something.
Yeah, and your degrees aren't, it's,
right?
you know, it's that engineering, that's heavy duty education.
Because I'm thinking I'm smart, you know, and, but I wasn't smart. I was educated, but I wasn't smart, and I certainly wasn't business smart. And so I went to this real estate seminar because Robert Kiyosaki said something along the lines of like, formal education will get you a job and specialized education will make you a fortune. Or maybe he borrowed that from Jim Rohn or somebody, right?
Love Jim Rohn.
So I go to this seminar, and this is back in, say, 2001, and I didn't bring my credit card. I didn't bring my checkbook. I didn't tell anybody that I went to a seminar, right? Because like I went back to work right after getting fired, and I'm like, I don't want anyone to know that I'm like going to a seminar. At the end, they offered like this mentorship program, and it was like 10 grand, you know, or something like. And I'm like, you got to be crazy, but I wanted to buy it, and that was the thing. I wanted to buy it, so I signed up for it, right? I didn't tell anybody. I was so embarrassed. I'm thinking like, oh my God, I probably lost that $10,000, right? But I just felt like, you know, the guy taught single family investing and he taught multifamily investing. So fast forward 8 months later, I bought my first investment property ever, and it wasn't a single family home. It wasn't a duplex. It wasn't a fourplex. It was a 32-unit building. That was the first property I ever bought. And remember, I was telling my story. I was in corporate America for like 14 years. And remember, I told you I got that commission check?
Yeah.
Well, I saved that commission check. So a lot of people ask me, how did you get the money to buy that 32 units? Well, I worked for 14 years, you know, right? And I saved that money. So I bought this 32-unit building, and I'm just telling you, like clockwork, every month, it put like $4,000 a month in my pocket. $4,000 a month, $4,000 a month, $4,000 a month, $4,000 a month. Well, I still had a job at this point, and I'm in sales again, so I kind of recovered from getting fired, and I make another sale, and I get another commission check. So 8 months after my first deal, I buy my second deal, and it's 30 units. So I have 32 units here, you know, 30 units here, and they're right around the block from each other, like in Monopoly, where you try to like buy the same color, right? And you make you get 2 houses, and you put a
hotel.
No, you make it into apartment building. That's a joke, by the way. Yeah. But like when people, I always do that. Well, how do you play Monopoly? Put 3 houses and make it in a hotel, and then I'm like, no, you do apartment, make it into apartment.
We need to update it.
Yeah. So I had these 2 properties. And what I found is that 62 units was easier to manage than 32. And that's when I started learning economies of scale. So like with 32 units, I had like a part-time manager, a part-time maintenance person. With 62 units, now I have a full-time manager, a full-time maintenance person. So the time and energy I had to spend running 62 units was actually less than when I had 32 units. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So sure. I learned like, hey, bigger is actually easier. So I have 62 units now. I'm making $8,000 to $10,000 a month from my properties, and my income was about $8,000 to $10,000 a month. So that I quit my job because that was my definition of retirement, right? When your investment income meets or exceeds your job income, then you could walk away from your job and you don't have to work anymore unless you want to, right? And so that happened when I was 38. It was in 2005. And so I haven't had a real job in 16 years. And that's how I got into real estate. And then since then, I learned how to syndicate deals, and syndication is just a fancy term for using other people's money, because I was out of money, and because I used all my own money to buy my first 2 deals, but I didn't want to stop doing deals, right? And so my third deal was actually 250 units, and I used $2 million of other people's money to buy that deal. And now, like since then, I've done over 7,500 units, in the last 20 years. Currently have about 4,500. And I'm buying right now is like one of the best times ever to be buying apartment buildings. So that's kind of my whole 20-year, history from how I got started, fast forwarding into right now. And yeah, it's been a great ride.
This is why I'm so happy you're here. I love your story. So your first real estate deal, I mean, you have the money, but what made you think apartment building? How'd you find it? Is this in Houston?
Yeah, it was in Houston, Texas. And so here was what I remember when I went to that seminar. I learned the first thing they taught was the basics of single family rentals. And I remember the numbers like it was yesterday. And I remember them saying, like, for each rental house, you'll make around $200 or $300 a month in cash flow. Well, I'm thinking I need to get to 10,000. So 200 a month, I need 50 houses. That's a lot of houses. But I went home that night and I wrote out my goals. And I'm like, okay, within 3 years, I'm going to own 50 rental homes and I'm going to quit my job. Well, day 2, they said, well, wait, if you have a little bit of money saved, like, 100, 200,000 or whatever, then you could start with a smaller apartment building. You don't have to start with single family and somehow graduate, into multifamily. And I was like, wow, I could have multiple units, multiple tenants under one building. And then I could have a manager, a maintenance person. If somebody moves out in a single family home, you have 0 occupancy. If somebody moves out in the 32 unit building, I still have 31 people living there. I have a manager. I don't have to go there and do the make ready, meet the resident, sign the lease, let the vendors in to paint the units. My manager lives on the property. She can do all of that. So I still had a job, and I was able to, manage the manager of this property, part-time. And then what I found is when I did my third deal, a 250 unit, oh my God, we had a full-time property manager, a full-time leasing agent, a full-time, certified maintenance technician, an assistant maintenance person, a porter, a landscaper, and then a professional management company managing all that, doing all your financials, your balance sheet, your cash flow statement, your income statement, and they send me all the reports. So buying the bigger deals is actually easier, and the reason most people don't do it is because they think they think it's harder to start with bigger deals. Sure, and they think they need to have all the money, but they don't. And that's why I love to teach. Because the reason I love to teach is because I was the most skeptical person in that seminar 20 years ago. Obviously, I was a little optimistic because I read the Kiyosaki's books and he talked about going to seminars instead of going to school. So I kind of went, but I still was skeptical. But at the end of the 2 days, I signed up for what they had to offer. And it worked. It did. It worked. And so, my belief is that if you commit to something, if you're the type of person when you commit, that you could do anything you want. And I was living proof of that. I mean, I had no experience. I had no previous real estate experience. And somehow I, went to a seminar, committed, found a teacher, a mentor, a guide that was willing to, take me under their wing. I paid that person, and it just paid off. So that's why I love to teach, because it had such a huge impact on me. I thought if Robert Kiyosaki's books could have that much impact on me, then I went to a seminar and hired a mentor, and that had a big impact on me. So I didn't start teaching right away. I bought deal after deal after deal after deal. I retired myself. But then I was like, well, now I want to keep doing deals, but I also want to give back and help other people do what other people help me do. Does that make sense?
It really does.
Yeah.
And it's so consistent. I've been so tickled about this. Really, everybody we've interviewed that's successful has this arm. They give back. They're looking to give back. I mean, one gentleman has an orphanage. I mean, there's so you're all very consistent. It's a beautiful thing that you guys want to give back.
Yeah, and that's a whole other thing. Like you mentioned charity, right? So a few years ago, we got to a point where we were paying $965,000 in taxes. I think it was tax year 2016 or 17. And I just, it's kind of like, and you get what you focus on. So I was focusing on doing deals and making money, But I wasn't focused on saving money on taxes.
Yeah.
And so as I did more deals and made more money, I thought it was just normal that I'm going to pay more tax. And at this point, I already had my education company up, mentoring people and doing events. And I'm up in front of the room in front of hundreds of people, kind of bragging that I'm paying $965,000 in taxes. If it's like, this is a badge of honor. You're like, hey, look at me. I make all this money. I pay all this tax, right? Well, Ken McElroy, I don't know if you know him, but he was in the room. It was a multi-speaker event, and I was one of the speakers. And when I finished, Kenny said, Brad, I just got to tell you, I have more doors than you, more units, more apartment units, and I pay less tax. And you need to change your CPA. So he referred me to another CPA. And I love mentioning names. Like I love giving people credit that really helped me. And it's Robert Kiyosaki, CPA, Tom Mcilroy, and he's a good friend of mine now. I don't know if you know him. But when I hired Tom in 2017, I'm 4 years in a row now of paying zero or very little tax. So my taxes went from almost $1 million down to virtually zero. Okay? And going back to the charity, I never thought I would do charity. I would hear people talk about charity and give 10%. I grew up with such scarcity with money that I just couldn't relate to that. I'm just being honest. Like, I love to say, oh yeah, I made, even when I made $30,000 a year, I gave 10% to charity or the church. I did not, okay? But as we started making more, and especially when we saved on the taxes, something in me just clicked. And I said, you know what? I didn't have a problem back then paying that much money in tax. And it wasn't going to road, schools, and bridges. Right. It would have been nice if it were, but
True.
It wasn't.
Right.
But let me redirect some. Now that we're saving all this money and not paying tax legally, by the way, because real estate is one of the best tax advantage investment vehicles that exist in the history of the world. And it still is. And so I'm like, you know what? My wife always wanted to build a school. And so we started getting into charities. And now we have, over the years, donated over $1 million to charity. And a lot of it's in third world countries. We do a lot of wheelchairs. We built a school in Ecuador. I mean, we didn't build it, but we funded it. Through the Rotary clubs and stuff like that. So now charity is like one of the big pieces of our life. When, back when I was an engineer making the 100 a year, I didn't give any money to charity because I was struggling to get by. And that sounds weird, struggling to get by on $100,000 a year, but I had student loans and a car and a house payment and all that type of stuff, and there just wasn't much to go around.
Well, congratulations and thank you. All right, I'm going back now. The first apartment building, You got anything go wrong in that? I mean, you found it in where you live, and you went in deep. I mean, 32 units is your first purchase.
Yeah, so how I found it is, so one of the things you need to be in an apartment investor is you need deal flow. And buying apartments are different than single families. Like, for example, you could get on the MLS, the multiple listing service for single family, and find in any market, you could find hundreds or even thousands of single family homes for sale, right? Apartments, you can't, if I want to buy a 30 unit or a 50 unit or a 100 unit or a 200 unit building, there's not really an MLS. There's not like a listing service. I mean, there's like LoopNet and there's broker websites, but there's not like one common place where people put their deals. And so it's kind of an unfair business in a way. It's kind of a business that, 90% of the deals are sold by real estate brokers that specialize in apartment buildings. And when you're new and you're like, they want to sell the people they've sold to before, right?
It's a people business.
It's a people business. And so again, by having that mentor that had apartments, he was able to vouch for me. I was able to leverage his experience, his contacts, his connections. And so the real estate agents that focused on apartment buildings in Houston would send him deals. And he couldn't buy them all. And he'd buy one or two a year. And then the rest of them he would give to the people he mentored. And so I would get deal flow by leveraging somebody else that got the deals. And then, so that's how I would find the deals. And then I would analyze them. So you got it. So, step one is you got to get deal flow. You got to find deals. And you could find them on your own, or you could find them through people that get them. And then when you find them, you got to analyze them. And again, even though I was an engineer, the first time I tried to analyze a deal, I didn't know what I was doing. Mm-hmm. But, repetition and practice and, having a blueprint and mentorship, I was able to learn how in just a few short weeks to crunch the numbers. So then I got competent in analyzing deals. And then I'd find one that worked, and then you make the offer, right? And so, when I closed this deal that I bought, my very first deal, was not a heavy rehab. I'm not a handyman. Like, I don't know if we're filming my fingers, but there's no dirt under my fingernails. The only tool I know how to use is a wine bottle opener. I'm serious. Like, I don't drive a pickup truck. I don't carry tools and stuff like that. In fact, when I bought my first apartment, I'm thinking, do I need to sell my BMW and buy a pickup truck? Like, what if I have to haul a stove or a appliance or something? And my mentor is like, no, you don't need to do that. You pay maintenance people. Okay, and that's what I love about apartments, is that you have enough doors and you have enough scale that you could pay people. So my first deal that I bought was totally renovated. The guy that I bought it from, his business model was to find properties that needed rehabbed and then sell them to people like me. So it was totally rehabbed. The manager was already in place. It was almost like a turnkey type of deal. Yeah. But that was the perfect starter property for someone like me that had a corporate job, that isn't handy with tools, right? I'm not a contractor. I don't have a team of, people that come out and fix it up. But what I learned was just how to take over a property that was already, we call it stabilized, that was already at 90-something% occupancy. And then just how do you optimize it? Mm-hmm. And there's 101 ways to optimize apartment buildings. You provide good customer service, and you renew the leases, and you raise the rents, and you add value to the property, and you prevent people from leaving by just providing good maintenance and good service. And so, and then I learned about the numbers. I taught myself how to do QuickBooks, and I taught myself how to do a profit and loss statement. But then if you remember, when I started buying the bigger deals, the management company does all that for you. So the thing I love about apartments is that you could buy a deal and be a true business owner. You know, you don't have to, you know, and as I got more experience, we would buy deals that need to be fixed up and stuff like that. But the thing is you could, you know, you're hiring teams of contractors and management companies that could do that for you. But I would tell anybody out of the gate, like, don't go out and buy a big fixer-upper on your first deal. It's riskier. It is. It's riskier. You know, in baseball terms, I just wanted to get a base hit. I wanted to close a deal that cash flowed, put money in my pocket. I didn't have to do a lot of work on it. You know, a lot of people think, I got to find like the ugliest deal out there because that's where the money is doing all the fixing and upping and stuff like that. And there is money in that, but it's also riskier. So a secret is, even to this day, and I've been doing this 20 years, I don't like to do a lot of the heavy, I mean, not that I do it myself, but I don't like to buy deals that need tons of heavy lifting. I like to buy deals in great markets, you know, where there's tailwinds. Like, have you ever, you know, walked or ridden the bike where the winds are blowing in your face and you got to pedal twice as hard? Well, I just want to buy in markets where, you know, they're landlord and business friendly and jobs are being created and people are moving there. You know, places like Dallas and Phoenix and Tampa and Atlanta where just the fundamentals are really strong, and buy deals in good neighborhoods where the tenants are, you know, have good jobs and pay the rent, and it's not that easy of a business, and I'm making it sound easy, but it's not that hard either. And I'll tell you, it's a heck of a lot easier than engineering or getting a master's degree or going to law school. It's a heck of a lot easier.
So you got your first two. What were the hard lessons learned in there? There's always some, right?
Yeah, well, the hard lessons. Well, one of them was, and see, by having a mentor, I didn't make a lot of big mistakes that a lot of people now that, you know, because I own deals, but I do mentoring, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are like, well, Brad, why should I, you know, sign up for your course? And I'm like, well, look, everything that I do, you could do on your own. It's true. But you might take longer and you might make some costly mistakes. So, you know, I'm a big Tony Robbins fan too. And Tony says things like success leaves clues. If you want to be successful, you don't need to make a lot of mistakes. You learn from somebody that's been successful so that you could, you know, leverage their success. So since I started, I always had a coach. And I still do now. Like right now, I have a guy that owns 25,000 doors, and he's a friend of mine. And so when I do deals, I have him overlook them. I'm like, hey, could you check my numbers? Is there anything I'm missing? Like, you know, so I don't want to say that I've never made mistakes, but all the mistakes I've made have been pretty forgiving. You know, some of the mistakes I've made have just been like investing with people too soon. Like, hey, I met this guy and I jump into a deal and then I find out maybe we weren't in alignment on our goals and stuff like that, right? So I think some common mistakes would be like buying a fourplex for me probably would have been a mistake. You know, like I know people were like, well, buy a fourplex and rent one unit and live in one unit, rent out the other three. Well, I didn't have to go through that. So I don't want to sound like I never really, you know, had any hard lessons, but like, you know, I started with a coach, and that coach prevented me from having to go through a lot of costly mistakes. And that's why I love teaching. I probably left money on the table on my deals, you know, like here's an example even now. Like I hire third-party management companies. I don't do my own property management. And I have some peers, even some of my students that I mentor, and they're like, Brad, you're leaving money on the table because no one's going to run your property as good as you. Think about that, right?
Sure.
But even at this event, like at this mastermind that we're at, right? You talk to these other guys and they're like, yeah, but that's okay. If you could hire somebody, and even if they can do 80% as good as you, right? Like, what's the highest and best use of my time?
Right. Do you want another job?
Yeah. So I don't want to be I don't want to be going to my properties every day. I don't want to be doing the job of the property management company. Yes, maybe if I spent another 20 hours a week on my properties and going to the properties, I could probably make, 3, 4, 5, 6% more money. And that could be a lot of money, right? But I'd rather spend my time finding deals and finding money. Like, that's what I do as an investor. I find deals and I find money and I invest in myself and go to masterminds. So I'm not down in the weeds.
Right.
Okay.
One quick thing that occurred to me, when your first one was 32 doors, if you go over, 5 doors, you're now in a commercial loan?
Correct.
How much more difficult?
It's actually easier. Yeah. So anything from 1 to 4 units, you're playing by the single family rules for appraisals, right? Anything 5 and up, now it's considered an income approach property. So it's playing by the rules of commercial. But I could just tell you, if you're trying to get a loan for a 5 unit versus a 30 unit, the lender's like the 30 units better than the 5.
More security.
It's another paradigm shift. And I could also tell you that if you're buying a 60 unit, they like the 60 better than the 30. So here's an example. My 32 unit that I did on my first deal, I got a full recourse loan. Full recourse means I'm personally liable. The deals I'm buying today, 150, 200, 300 unit deals, I get what's called a non-recourse loan. It means I'm not personally liable. So think about that. The people buying the bigger deals are not personally liable for their loans.
Is that just a scale thing?
So it's 2 things. It's scale and it's experience. So usually when people start off with no experience, they might have to take on some personal liability. But once you have a track record, and if you buy a big enough deal, so if you buy a 60, 70, 80 unit deal, even if you use other people's money, the lender is looking more at the property. They're lending on the asset, right? So if the income generated from the asset covers the expenses and the debt payment, then they're more likely to give you the loan. Where even if they're looking at a 5, 10, 15 unit, even though it's commercial, they're still looking more at the individual borrowing the money. And the difference is, just think even an ESBI, right, with Kiyosaki, employee, self-employed, business owner, investor, that person buying the 100 unit is going to be likely, and this is how the banks look at it. The person buying the 100 unit has more systems in place. They're thinking more like a business owner. They're going to hire a professional management company. Oh, we'll give them a better loan with more loan dollars at a better rate with less recourse. The person buying the 15 unit, the stereotype is they're the mom and pop. They're going to run it themselves. The husband's going to be the maintenance guy. The wife's going to be the manager. They're going to sit there and babysit the property. They're not going to have a professional management company. They're going to put their receipts in a shoebox. Seriously. Yeah. They're not going to have detailed financial reporting. See, the banks like detailed financial reporting. They want to see profit and loss statements, balance sheets, cash flow statements, general ledgers. If this sounds complicated, it is if you try to do it yourself. I don't do any of this stuff myself. On my 32 unit, I'm like, oh man, I'm having to teach myself QuickBooks. And I'm like, wow, this is racking my brains here. And you go buy a 60, 80, 100 unit deal in the management company, they do all that for you.
You had to find...
And they do it better than I could do it.
Sure, that's what they do. But you had to find and hire the management company.
Yeah, but you Google management companies, right? But you don't want to Google management companies. You want to find a management company from somebody else that has a property just like the one you're buying in the same market you're buying. Like if I'm going to Tampa to buy a 200 unit building, I'm not going to Google property management companies in Tampa. I'm going to find out who else is which management company is managing this building across the street that's 150 units. And there's another one over here that's 300 units. And there's another one over here that's 180 units. I'm going to find those management companies. I'm going to visit their properties. I'm going to talk to the owners that employ them. That's how you find management companies. And it's easy.
Yeah.
But it may not be easy if you don't know what to do, but it's actually pretty easy.
Every word you've said just resonates and rings so true. As you're teaching somebody, so you got to find the properties, like you said, find people, get a coach, get a mentor who can help you build that pipeline and flow. But then finding the finances, like you had a chunk that you were smart enough to keep aside, so you had an in, and then you got another one, so you had an in for the second one. But on your third one, you were already using other people's money. When you're coaching people, when you're mentoring somebody, and I'm looking for my first buy and bigger, more doors is better.
Right. Well, this is why, like, if you look at all the ingredients that you need to be a successful, say, an apartment investor, we talked about deal flow, and then you want to learn how to analyze deals. Well, then the next step is to fund them.
Yeah.
And when you fund them, you need, say, I always, in my seminars, I teach you need 30% down and 70% debt. Well, where do you get the 30% down? Let's say it's a $1 million building. You need $300,000. Oh my God, if it's a $10 million building, you need $3 million. For a newbie, they might be like, oh my God, that's why I'm not going to do apartments.
Right.
But now what if I told you that $3 million could be from other people? Or let's say you have 50. Like I put 50,000 in a deal and I'll raise 2.95 from other people. Well, that's the question. Where do you get to 2.95? Well, that's why you go to masterminds. You go to, when I was a kid, my dad would take me fishing. I hated fishing, by the way. I would be the kid throwing the rocks in the pond to scare the fish away, but as a side note. But my dad would always say, well, we want to go to a pond that's stocked, right? So where is a stocked pond when you're looking for investors? Well, some people might say, my neighbors, or the people that at my company that I work at, or maybe the people at my church. Well, what I find is the stocked ponds are where are real estate investors, right? Because if I have to explain to you why real estate is better than stocks or gold or Bitcoin or NFTs or whatever is going on out there, right? It's like a salmon swimming upstream, right? But if I go to a real estate investor event or a real estate mastermind or the events that I conduct where we have people that want to learn apartment investing, you're in a stocked pond. Mm-hmm. And so the term I use when I tell people, like, what does it take to be a successful real estate investor, any type of real estate that requires using other people's money, is you need to tap into a community of investors. And that could be, masterminds, educational events, meetup groups. And that's where you find investors. People that already know they want cash flow. They already know they want appreciation. They already know that 98% of all millionaires have been created through real estate. And there's millions of people that want to invest in real estate already, right? So it's just easier to raise money from those types of people than like the person sitting across your cubicle at your company that says, hey, Brad, next time you find a deal, I want in on it. But then you show them the deal and you're like, yeah, my stockbroker says it's risky. I mean, sure. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I'm getting 6% in my portfolio over here with Schwab. And I'm like, yeah, but 6%, you're not going to get rich on that because the rule of 72 at 6%, you're going to double your money in 12 years. But these real estate deals were, the passive investors are doubling their money in like 3 to 5 years. They're getting rich a lot faster. Oh, my broker says it's risky. Right. Well, you go to real estate investor clubs. They already want to do real estate. Mm. So that's the other key to success, is not only getting deal flow and learning some competencies on deal analysis, but now when you tap into communities of investors, it's easier to raise the money.
You mentioned a couple times about knowing how to analyze and do the numbers to find a good deal. What are key elements you're looking for when you're buying a 36 unit or a 150 unit apartment?
Well, here's the beauty. Like once you have like a system to analyze a deal, like whether I'm buying a 30 unit, which at this point I don't buy deals that small, but whether it's 30 or 300, what you need is a simple yet robust property analyzer. Okay, and there's some that people could buy online or whatever. So like, here's an example. Like, in single family, right? A lot of people might use like a cash flow calculator. Like you have your rent, and then you subtract from your rent your principal, interest, tax, and insurance, and then maybe like a vacancy factor and some maintenance, and then that's your cash flow, right? Well, in multifamily, it's similar, but there's a little bit more nuances in multifamily, right? So in a like a property analyzer, like I've created one, because the ones that are like were commercially available were either way too simple and they're not robust enough, or on the other side, like I don't know if you ever heard of the CCIM, it's a certified commercial investment member, and you have to get training for that. Well, I went through that program, and they have a 10-year discounted cash flow analysis, but it's a 40-hour class to learn how to use the tool. 40 hours. It's very robust, okay? But what I found is you don't need something that robust, okay? So one of the good things about my engineering degree was I was able to create like a simplified version of a multifamily property analyzer, okay? But some of the things that you need to have is you need to know things like what's the rent growth? So like I analyze all my deals that I'm gonna buy it and hold it for 5 years. Now, I don't hold all my deals for 5 years, but if you have a common approach, right? Like that way, if I'm analyzing deal A, deal B, deal C, I just assume that I'm going to buy it and sell it within a 60-month period. And that way, I have like a systematic approach for any deal I'm going to buy in any market. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So then I'll get market data. Like if I'm buying in Tampa versus Phoenix versus Dallas, I want to know what the rent growths are in each of those markets. So I'm going to use different rent growths depending on what's happening in that market. I'm going to use different cap rates depending on the cap rates of the markets. I'm going to use different taxes. Like when you're analyzing a deal, like the taxes in Florida are different than the taxes in Texas. Okay, so you know the system for analyzing a multifamily property is, and again, we're not building multifamily properties. I'm buying existing multifamily properties. So any property you buy, you're always going to get the seller's financials. So you always have a starting point, right? You know what the seller's income is, and you know what their expenses are. So that's your starting point. So like your first column in a property analysis will be like, well, what are the actual numbers? What's the rental income? What is the non-rental income? Non-rental income in apartments, there could be 100 and, you know, not literally, but there could be laundry income, covered parking income, utility income, cable income, you know, pet income. There's all these other sources of income, okay? So you could add all that up, and then you have your rental income, your non-rental income, there's your total income. And then you just look at the seller's numbers. There's, you know, repairs, maintenance, management fees, payroll, taxes, insurance, marketing, advertising, locator fees, right? And so you put all that in a spreadsheet. Then you start doing a pro forma. Now, here's the tricky part. Anytime a property is being sold, most apartment buildings are being sold by brokers. 90% of them are being sold by brokers, and the brokers always put together a pro forma. Well, some brokers put together really good pro formas. They do. And other brokers put together pro formas that are really favorable for their client, which is the owner of the property, the seller of the property. Our job as the potential buyers is to put together our own pro forma, right? So I always start with the seller's numbers and I look at the broker pro formas, but ultimately, again, and this is the value of having a mentor, having a coach in the beginning, because I'm looking at these numbers and I don't know what repairs and maintenance should be, and I don't know if the seller's numbers are accurate or if they're cooking the books and not showing all their numbers or whatever, but that's what a buyer needs to ascertain, right? And by looking at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of deals over 20 years, like I could look at a 200 unit deal in Dallas or Tampa or Phoenix or in Atlanta, and I can tell you that, here's where the maintenance needs to be. Here's where the repairs needs to be. Here's what the marketing needs to be. Here's what the advertising needs to be. Here's what the payroll needs to be. Like if it's a 200 unit property, I know that, you need to have a manager and a leasing agent on the inside of the office. And then you need to have a lead maintenance person. And you need to have an assistant maintenance person. And you need to have a groundskeeper. And you need to have a property management company. And that's a 3% management fee. And the payroll should be this. So like I get to know these numbers, but you don't know them in the beginning.
No.
You just don't know them in the beginning. So again, you could learn them, you could figure it out on your own, or you could just collapse time frames and leverage other people's, 10, 20 years of experience.
Yeah, because that could be an expensive education.
It can be a very expensive education. One of the biggest mistakes could be like you could go out and buy a 100-unit apartment building and raise money, but you really need to be dialed into what the numbers should be. And you can't just use the seller's numbers and assume that the seller's numbers are going to be you can't just assume the seller's income is going to be your income, the seller's expenses are going to be your expenses. And you can't just assume that the broker's pro forma is going to be how you're going to be running your property. So you as the buyer, me as the buyer, or me as the coach for my students, I am helping them put that piece of the puzzle together. They're leveraging my 20 years of experience because I've done 40 transactions myself. Okay. And I've looked at hundreds and hundreds of deals for the people that I mentor. And so, again, just by repetition, repetition, by doing something like I always ask people like, take a doctor and I say, okay, well, what do you do for a living? Well, I'm a surgeon. Well, I'm a foot surgeon. Well, how many feet have you operated on in the last 20 years? Well, I do 8 operations a day times, 300 days a year that I work times 20 years. And I'm like, well, you're pretty competent at that, right? Like if I had to operate on a foot, I'd probably cut it off, but you've been doing this every day, hundreds of times a year.
That's mastery, right?
He's mastered it. And so that's why experience matters. Okay. So like the number, the financial analysis is important. And like I said, in the beginning, even though I was an engineer, I'd look at the numbers. I had no idea, I'd be scratching my head. Well, I'm asking my coach, I'm like, how do you know what the payroll is? Well, I just know because I've looked at hundreds of deals, Brad, and I know like if, one property manager can manage up to 100 units. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Well, now I know it.
How would you know it?
Yeah,
right?
how would you know it? So it's really important that you get the numbers right.
Sure, that's everything, right?
Yeah.
It'll make or break you.
Yeah, and the numbers are, again, so what I do is every deal, like I could analyze a deal now within, if I have the seller's numbers and I have access to market data, and market data is another, that's a whole nother discussion because you need to be able to put in like your forecast for rent growth. And so we look at demographics, we look at how many people were moving there and how many jobs are being created. And we kind of know these markets, right, where we're active in. Basically, you need to have the seller's numbers, you need to have access to market data. And I could put together an analysis for any property in the country in less than 30 minutes.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, because you've got a system,
Right.
and you've created your own pro forma, so you can just plug numbers into that.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to the nut of it. How much capital does somebody have? Does somebody need to get into this?
Well, here's the thing. I always tell people, and it's not as much as you would think. if you have $50,000, well, first of all, $50,000 will enable you to be a passive investor in just about anybody's deal. Because when most people were doing their capital raise, they usually set a minimum amount. Now, sometimes you could get into deals for less than 50, but just about everyone I know, not just people that I mentor, but just about anyone I know out there, they will set their minimum investment level of $50,000. So for people that want to be passive, meaning all they need to do is find an experienced operator and invest in their deals, $50,000 should get you into a deal. The next question is, well, how much do I need to buy my own deal? Well, that's the dilemma. Because you see, there's really three ways to buy apartments. One is you could invest as a passive investor, and I just explained that. Two is you could buy your own deal with your own money, but that's where you need a big down payment. And again, if you remember earlier in this conversation, I said that's why a lot of people, maybe in the beginning, they're scared or they move toward a smaller, like a rental home. Because you could buy a rental home with what? You could buy a rental home with what, 10, 20% down, and it's $200,000. So if you have 20 grand, you could go buy a rental house. And you think, well, I can't buy that $10 million apartment there because I need $3 million. And you do need to have a 30% down payment, or 20 or 30%, right? But again, if we go back to that conversation where I said, well, look, the $3 million down payment on that $10 million deal doesn't need to be your money. And so I know it sounds almost unbelievable, but I'm just telling you, I have so many examples of people that I mentor, and I've done this myself, where I'll put like $50,000 into a deal, but if I'm associated with and have access to a community of investors that want to invest with me, people that know me, like me, and trust me, you'll be able to raise the money. So I tell people all the time, if you have $50,000 and you could put it into a deal and you're connected with a community of investors, you'll be able to get the money if it's a good deal. So sometimes like people don't believe it, but that's why, again, mastermind events, we're here in a mastermind right now. If you're around enough people that are doing that, then you start to get confidence. So sometimes it's not enough for me to say, oh yeah, you could go out and buy a $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $10 million deal with $50,000. But you can, if you have enough resources and you need investors. And then, you also need to get the debt. And we haven't talked about that yet. Because if 30% of the money is coming from investors, that's your equity portion. And then 70% is coming from debt. And so you still need to get the loan. But here's the other thing. The net worth and the liquidity that the lender is looking for from the borrower doesn't just have to be you. It could be a group of people.
That team.
Yeah. And so, when you said, hey, let's get to the nut of it is this is a team sport. Multifamily investing is a team sport. If you're thinking, I have to do everything myself, I have to have all the money, I have to have the net worth, I have to have the liquidity, I have to have the down payment, you'll never be able to, I don't want to say you'll never be able to do it, but you're going to need to start small and kind of claw your way up, and it'll take you years and years and years. But if you think, hey, I'm just going to do this with a group of like-minded people that are educated, I'm fishing in that stocked pond, and there's people that are interested in doing this, and they know, like, and trust me, and now we could pool our money together, and we could qualify for the debt, we could get the equity, we could buy the deal, we could share in the profits. The people that are overseeing the deal they deserve to take a little bit more of the profits because they're doing the work.
Sure.
That's how we take down these big deals.
So then we just got to find the deals, which is kind of the same answer, right? Get involved with these groups.
Yep.
Go to the stocked pond.
It's not just a what you know business, but it's who you know. And so again, by leveraging other people that have deals, you'll get deals. And I've been doing this 20 years, and I was kind of pigeonholed for so many years at like a $20 million deal. And it was like, there were a couple times where I tried to go after like a 30 or a 40, but it was kind of like, well, Brad, you're kind of like the $15 to $20 million deal guy, like, you've never done this $30 million deal, so we don't want to give it to you. Seriously, that's how these brokers think. And there's certain brokers that specialize in bigger deals and smaller deals. So the first time I went bigger than 20 million, I had to, I mentioned earlier, there's a guy that's kind of a mentor to me, and he's got 25,000 units, and he buys 300, 400, 500 unit deals. I had to pull him in, and he had to be like a reference, and he had to vouch for me, and like, we're sitting with the broker over dinner, and the guy's sitting there going, hey, Brad could do this deal, and I vouch for him. And then like on the side, he's like, Brad, you better close this deal, because I put my reputation on the line for you. And so it really is, it's really about how do you leverage other people. And it could be other people's money, other people's experience, other people's time, but it's really a business about leverage. And I don't want to sound self-promoting, but look, I started with a mentor, and I have mentors. And what I found is mentors have mentors. Like the most successful people in the world, they have sometimes not one, but multiple coaches.
Brad, I thank you so much for taking time with us. You're just priceless.
Thank you. Well, this was fun. I'm really glad to be here.
Well, James, that concludes your interview with Brad Sumrock. What was that like sitting through that?
It was fascinating because this guy's all about multifamily. So that was new for me and a whole nother area of real estate to delve into. And he was just, again, a great educator. Opened my eyes to a lot of new possibilities with multifamily investing.
Thanks to you for being here for that. And James, thanks for taking the time to do that interview.
Delightful.
Yeah, great to bring it all together and to be here with you right now. That concludes just episode 1 of our 9-part docuseries, Hacking Real Estate. I hope you got a lot out of this first episode, but as you can see, there's a long way to go, a lot more content that we're going to cover. And please make sure, while we are here in this previewing period, in the very beginning of it, that you share this, that other people can go ahead and learn from this content. One of the things I learned that is really important is a thing called the study buddy. Get someone that you can go through this process with, share your notes. You'll get a lot more out of it that way. So thanks for being here. I look forward to seeing you in episode 2.
After 2008, I didn't own anything. All the properties during that crash, I lost everything. I had to start over. I basically just did rental arbitrage. I would rent a property for $1,000 a month, put it on Airbnb, and make $3,000 a month. There's no other model in real estate where you create cash flow, within a couple weeks, especially with almost no money out of pocket. So it's just a great model. There's no business like that I know of. Most businesses, you're not profitable for many months, or maybe not even in the first year. And this is something that most anybody can do. It's not a super complicated business to do.
I need to start building a different stream of revenue because I've gotten into so much debt. And I said, I just want to flip one house, maybe a year, maybe 2, start building a different stream of income. Because there's 1.5 million different avenues in real estate, right? But that was the one that I really, really wanted to focus on. And I was just so fascinated by it. And also the limitless opportunity and flexibility that it provided. So I just said, I'm just going to go for it. And what that turned into was me hiring a coach, making almost $100,000 on that. It was honestly the smartest thing I ever did.
There's 3 major problems with flipping houses. You got to find the deals, you got to find the money, and then you've got to figure out how to rehab them and fix them up. So I almost had unlimited deals and money without ever figuring that part out. And so that's what I've been building for the last 5 years. The question I always get is, how do you find your deals? Like, there's some secret to doing it. We've got the MLS, and you've got Zillow, and you've got for sale by owners. So I think an abundance mindset is key. Because one of the things I learned doing everything the hard way is there's always more deals, there's always more money.